Michael Baltimore here. I'm fortunate to have Dr. Gary Sprayberry with me today to talk about a show development for something we've called so far, Gary, the history moment. Although we may want to decide to change that. You certainly have some ideas about that. And so what we want to do is spend a little time just talking about how this is going to go.
Sure.
What it needs to be. You know, folks, if you're watching, the thing that we do here in the CSU television studios is to help people and really kind of come up and take their ideas and their learning, their passion, their expertise, and put it in a format so that we can share it with a larger audience. And that's generally our mission here at the university. And so it's always a pleasure when we have someone who is interested in coming in the studio and is going to spend some time with us and figure out what they can do and how we as a studio crew begin to put this and produce this show for you in the way that that'll be good for us, for you, and for our viewers. So, Gary, how are you doing today?
Good, great.
Well, I'm glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
As we do this, we're going to jump into just actually what we want to do on that show. But
okay.
Tell us a little bit about you and what you do. We've got you've seen the lower third already come up there, guys that say Dr. Gary Sprayberry, department chair, I believe.
Yeah. I've been department chair since fall of 2011 when our former chair departed for another institution, and I've been at CSU since the fall of 2006. Been in the history and geography department since then.
Yeah, that really sounds good. Tell me about this idea. I mean, I'm always out looking and lurking and trying to find people who might be interested in coming in and doing a show for the television channels that we have, our YouTube and other places. And now we're into podcasting, so this is up on iTunes, that kind of thing. So, what gave you the idea? What was your inspiration in kind of coming in?
Well,
about this thing?
I think part of the inspiration came from the fact that I was on the Education Forum and had such a good time telling the story about the Freedom Riders.
Oh, yes,
and,
that was a good show.
And then in conversations with you, just coming up with the idea of maybe doing a program about, I don't know, local history, regional history, southern history or something, but something to do with history and bringing in people from the community, because there's a lot of interesting stories out there, interesting folks to talk to.
Well, see, I think you're right about that, and it is interesting, and certainly if you're talking about the local scene and people who've lived in this community, but also in the region and across the state and a little bit more in terms of the southeast region, that if you lived around here long enough, you probably want to know more about
a lot of stories.
And sometimes we just get a little bit of information. If we get whatever the newspaper decides to write or the television in the sound bites that they're famous for, put out there for us, and it's not enough. We don't know the backstory. We don't know things that kind of help motivate and build the scenario and the results of things. So, so you want to do a show that it's about history,
right?
And what do you have in mind about it? What's this show going to look like and sound like?
I think I could imagine us having sometimes guests like this, and have them tell their stories. Maybe even go on location to places like the Port Columbus Civil War Naval Museum downtown along Victory Drive. We could go there, talk to Ken Johnson, the director, and look at some of their exhibits and talk about some of their events. I could imagine going to Columbus Museum, doing the same things. Different repositories, museums around the community that have so much to offer. And I think these are, in some cases, especially Port Columbus, they even say it themselves, that it's one of those places that not many people know about, maybe outside the city or in the region, that it should be highlighted. These stories, there's so many interesting stories that could be told about that place, and there's so many fascinating exhibits. That's kind of what I have in mind.
I think it's a great idea, and we're going to help make this show happen, and then follow up with it and put it on all of our platforms out there for folks. You know, when you talk about some of those stories, one of the first things that I know in good television, they talk about storytelling, the ability to sort of tell that story that engages the viewer into the process. Now, you were very good on Education Forum. I know
Thanks.
that I've had several comments from people that I've shown a little clip of it, and they said, "Why didn't you show more? I was wanting to hear what happened next."
Yeah, that was a lot. That was a lot of fun.
That it really was. It was a great show, and we advise people to take a look at that particular episode of Education Forum with Greg and Jeff, who do it here. About to start back next week with their series. They're going to do weekly on those kind of things. All right, so you'll bring some guests in. We'll just book some folks to come in on the set and talk with you, and then,
people from town, or maybe even my colleagues in the history and geography department, who maybe to talk about their own research or to tell some of those stories. There's endless possibilities for that.
Well, I like it. I think the old adage that if we don't know history and we don't remember history, we're bound to repeat those things, somehow make those mistakes. I'm not sure the phrasing on that.
We always repeat the mistakes.
We repeat mistakes until we know, even though if we know history, we might. That's very interesting. So, like tell us some of the ideas, because a little bit more into our conversation today. I want to talk about the structure of the show, maybe how to what you'll see, what next, and the segments and those kind of things. But you mentioned some already in the local area. And we've had a lot there's been some tragic history, of course, but Columbus goes back a long way. And you talking the Naval Museum, we've done some documentaries here. We've had the communication department, those students actually did it. I don't know if it was completed or not. I have to ask Daniel on the crew there. But I know we have a portion of that we've actually played here that talks about how that CSS Jackson, I believe, was the name of it. That gunboat that was built here in Columbus was set ablaze as the war got closer and set adrift down the Chattahoochee.
Yeah, and they raised it in the early mid-70s, or maybe a little
60s.
Okay,
yeah, I think it was that.
It's their prized exhibit there at the museum. And what's fascinating about it, I mean, it takes up a third of the museum, or if not more. It's very large. And I've noticed that every time I go in there, it smells different. Like the wood smells different. It's a great exhibit. It's a great story about how they raised it from the depths of the Chattahoochee and sat in a building for years. And this museum was created just recent history.
Right.
Not too long ago, the museum was created primarily to house that. But they have a number of other exhibits. They have flags from the Civil War era. Right now, they have an exhibit dedicated to Robert Smalls, who was a slave in South Carolina, who in 1862, he and a handful of other slaves took a boat called the Planter, because he had some navigation skills. He had some experience at seafaring, and he and some others took this boat called the Planter. In the middle of the night, they piloted this thing out of the Charleston harbor and went out to the Union blockade, turned over the ship to the Union blockade. He ends up in Boston, and he joins the Union Navy to fight against the Confederacy. When the war's over, the fascinating part to me is he comes back to South Carolina, where he had been a slave, and served several terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. So they have a traveling exhibit dedicated to him that his family and others put together, and it's traveling all over the country. So, I mean, that's just one little story,
one little story, but it has so many facets of it, and it's a very large story, as it turns out, and I think people are interested in that. So that's why I'm thrilled to have this show start here at the CSU TV studios. You had one of the things you talked about on the Education Forum, and I know you talked with Susan Rock, who does Inside the Professor's Study as well at one point, but about the Freedom Riders. That was a big exhibit not too long ago here at the university. And you helped get that here and make that happen. Tell us about
we decided we got a couple of grants. We got a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, and we received one of the interdisciplinary initiative grants here at CSU, and we decided to do a year-long commemoration of the Civil Rights Movement. And a big part of that would be to bring this traveling Freedom Riders exhibit here, and it was here from mid-October to mid-November in 2013. And then we brought in a number of speakers. One of them was Charles Person, who was one of the original 13 Freedom Riders. He spoke at the University Hall, which is great, well attended. It was wonderful.
What was he
event.
like? Let me interrupt and just ask you a question about what was he like? What was your impression when you met him?
He's very, very open, very funny. He's kind of an electronics geek as well. He talked about that.
We can identify with that.
And he lived an interesting life. I mean, he was, after he was 18 years old when he boarded that bus and became a freedom rider. So very, very young.
Wow.
And he traveled through the South, was beaten, horribly in Birmingham, was attacked in Anniston. And he, after that, he ended up going into the Marine Corps, and he served 20 years in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
And when he got out of the Marine Corps, he actually went and lived in Cuba for a short time, and had an electronics business there that catered to the base there in Guantanamo Bay.
Okay. All right.
And then he was employed by the school system. I guess it was the Fulton County school system, the Atlanta area, of course, and then retired from the school system there. And now he's so generous with his time as well. He was here recently for an event for the Martin Luther King weekend, the Saturday before the holiday, and just very open, very generous with his time. Tells great stories.
Oh, I bet.
And
those stories
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet those stories.
And
are
so
great.
willing to, I think, give his time to students and to faculty and to researchers, which is wonderful for us.
It occurs to me that each of these generations, we talked about this here just with all the students who work in I'm fortunate to work with here in the studio, about the period of time when you grew up and what you know during that time. And if you grew up years ago, like some of us, we remember all of these things. But there's certain pieces of history that may be out of awareness, or maybe they know something about, but it's not really kind of fresh in the memory, and you can't recall it very much. And so there seems to be some really big gaps in our knowledge of history, and that might help shape our futures, people have talked about. So
I think so.
And
I think that's why there should be an emphasis on local regional history, because I've noticed, and I'm a big proponent of local history, or maybe you want to call it microhistory, because once you start shining a spotlight on these lesser known parts of history, or these moments in history, I think suddenly all of those kind of general kind of conclusions, if historians have reached about a certain event or period in history, once you shine a light or put a microscope on these things, you find out that some of their conclusions are wrong. That they don't usually apply in every place. And I mean that's one thing. But also there are just thousands of stories that are out there that should be told. Fascinating stories. And Muskogee County, Columbus, the Chattahoochee Valley, to me there hasn't been enough research and investigation of this rich history in this area. And that's what I'd like to do with this part of the mission, I think, for the show should be to investigate that.
I'm really looking forward to it. I think you're right about it. Now, where do you go to get information? I know, obviously, you said before that you'll have guests on who can either recollect about that or have a knowledge themselves of it, but where do you generally go if you want to find out? I mean, if I just dropped you in Columbus, where would you go to find those stories about this local area? Where would you start?
Yeah, I would. A good place to start would be the CSU Archives. The Columbus State University Archives, which is they have a great collection there, a big collection. I would go to the local history section of the public library on Macon Road. And I might even contact people at the Ledger Inquirer. There are people who have written for the newspaper for a number of years that can put you into contact with people like Billy Wynn and Fred Fussell, and also, I mean, I've got the advantage of being in the history and geography department, so I know a lot of the retired faculty members like John Leupold, who is a wealth of information about local history, and he's always a good person to talk to, and he can always point you in the right direction. The guy knows everybody. It seems like.
I saw him on a documentary that they did. It was part of I'd love to have permission to play that on our television. I'm able to seek that. When they were talking about building the Whitewater route here in Columbus, and they went back and they did a historical view of what the town, how it started around the river and the uses of the river, and the textiles industry and floating those textiles and cotton down the Chattahoochee, and it built up with that. But he was actually featured on that, talking about some of those.
He probably knows more about the industrial history of Columbus than anybody. He's
Wow.
written about it. He spent years researching.
See,
and
I think people want to watch that.
I think so.
I want to hear from him. I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
hear what that's a rich knowledge
Right.
that he has, and if he's willing to share it, that's going to make this show something to watch.
Well, you know what's interesting too is what we're doing. Amanda Reese in our department, who's a geographer in our department, her and her students this semester are working with the people at Whitewater Express, and they've decided that I haven't been on one of these. Have you been on one of these rafting
No, I haven't.
trips?
I
Okay.
haven't.
Then you and I, we're gonna have
we
to.
need to do that.
We're gonna do
I'm gonna put the crew on there. I promise to do that sometimes. Sometimes as a reward, maybe sometimes as an incentive.
Our punishment. Either way.
That's right.
Go through
Going down that road.
what is it? The cut bait.
The cut bait that we hear so much about.
Yeah.
But you know, that's kind of that backflow of water. You get in there and that thing's going to go anyway.
Or eventually spit you out. But she's working with this Whitewater Express, her and her students in her, I think it's her cultural geography class, and they realized that a big chunk of their voyage down the river is just them paddling, and they decided that they're passing all this history and all these cool buildings and old factories, and they would like a bit of information about these places. So what they're doing is they're compiling some history of all these places on either side of the river, so that the guides, when they do take people down the river, they'll have something to tell. They'll have a story and the history of this place.
Oh, I like that.
In
that documentary.
So it'd be good to bring her in and tell us about.
She's on the list right now. As a matter of fact, we're building a list as we talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, back to that documentary about the building of that and how they went to other places in the United States to look at how they built their whitewater situation. That there was a lot about the mills and the dams, because they had to take the dams out of the river in order for this to work. And talking about the Eagle and Phoenix mill. But Phoenix was after that mill had burned down. That name was put on there afterwards, because they kind of brought it back after being just completely devastated and burned down. So there's so many things in that way.
Yeah.
All right, we could keep going. We really could keep going on this, because I'm fascinated with that, and I have a million questions as usual. Those who know me come in the studio. But let's talk about the structure of the show.
Okay.
How do we generally play an intro and an outro, as we call them, to kind of wrap up the show, and what's in the middle is the show. And do you want to? How do you foresee this? I've got a couple ideas, and I thought we know that a lot of our shows have segments, that we start out with a segment, maybe an interview with someone, then it cuts to another, maybe a different piece, something else in history. It might be that you do an entire show on one topic. So how have you thought?
I can imagine doing it each way, and I think as long as each episode opens with the nice intro piece, and with me just sort of introducing the topic or introducing the guest or the place that we're going to, and then we could do different segments. I could imagine us going on location to like Port Columbus Naval Museum, or going to the place where Dr. Thomas Burr, was the NAACP leader, was assassinated in 1956. Here in Columbus, yeah, down on First Avenue. There's a historic marker on First Avenue. It's very close to the Springer down there. So that's I think that should be the maybe first episode. Get Billy Wynn to come in and tell, because he's done a lot of research on that. He used to write for the Ledger Enquirer, and have not only have like this guests, going back and forth talking and about these different topics, but yeah, go on location. But also, there are plenty of archival photographs at the CSU archives that we could show. We could show documents. We could show, if we could get the rights, not only photographs and some of these documents, but I could imagine little pieces of film footage as well. Like in 1971, there was racial violence over the summer of 1971. 160 racially motivated fire bombings in downtown Columbus in the summer of 1971. Wow. And I know there's news footage of that. So I could imagine showing a march or showing the police protest or something like that.
Right. I think one of the good news for us as University Television is that we are providing information. We do work under the Fair Use Standards Act. We do have a consulting attorney on these kinds of things, and so one of the things that we
Is this a disclaimer?
This is just for your information, but also for those who are viewing it. You know, we're using this as for educational purposes here. This is a nonprofit. That's a university, and so we have a lot more leeway in showing those things, particularly when we're examining things almost in a documentary or news style and presenting this in terms of learning.
And that's good, because I could see these as mini documentaries, really. In some cases, that's really the way I'm kind of approaching it.
Well, let me say this too, that I know that, and I've talked with a lot of people about this. I know for Sean Cruzen on This Week in Space Science, it's a very popular show that's now on iTunes.
It's a great show.
It's doing a great job. He's just so full of information that they've been helping us learn about space science. But he's also used that as in terms of some learning for the classes that he teaches. He will refer someone to watch a particular episode, and this is what we've covered here. So there might be more utility, maybe some uses here for this in actual classes or that kind of thing, especially if it's a documentary style.
Yeah, because I could imagine having somebody like Doug Thompson, who teaches Latin American history in our department. I mean, if somebody wants to know something about the School of the Americas, I could imagine, there's now WINSEC, I could imagine him coming in and we doing an entire program dedicated to that, telling both sides, making it balanced. And
it's kind of a controversial thing here in Columbus.
It is.
Because there's a protest each year still going on.
And it's something that, it's controversial, but maybe people don't know the backstory, why it is controversial, and you get him to do that. And it would always be a source there that you could use in classrooms, that people who are unfamiliar with it or unfamiliar with the Columbus area, they could see it. They could, instead of reading a book about it, they could easily go to this documentary. And I'm not saying we shouldn't read a book. You should definitely read plenty of books. But it would be an accessible source, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Now, how about projects with your class, the courses that you teach, and your students? Is there a way to think about maybe how the students might get involved in this project? I don't know. I'm throwing you a curveball.
I have thought about this, and because I had planned, even before you and I were talking about it, I had planned to move the department in some way, at least I would do this, move into the realm of digital humanities, and big part of that would be to do podcasts and these mini documentaries. So I was going to get students involved, doing the research for them, conducting interviews, writing the scripts, things like that. So I could definitely see students getting involved, and I think they would want to get involved in something like this. They could walk away with a whole new skill set that ordinarily history majors wouldn't walk away with. It's the way I see it.
I mean, we're trying to spread the word on this digital revolution that's going on. We want to be on the cutting edge of that, and certainly with this equipment that we have, the ability to stream live, to stream recorded, to be on multiple channels and platforms out there.
Right.
Certainly we want to be able to do it. So I'd love to have the students involved in this, and certainly we give them credit for that. But I think it's a learning opportunity to do this, because you're not only finding out the facts and you're reading it and you're getting the information for yourself, but you're sharing it with others out there, and then that may lead to other things and further learning as we know. All right, so this sounds really good. Do we? I don't know where this idea comes from, but I'll throw it out anyways. We're talking about show development here for our History Moment. The sound bite. Do you if you're doing a promo for your show? I would like for you to watch my show on Columbus State Television, and we will do promos for this, by the way. That's part of the entire package of what we do. We want to invite others to think about this as well. But what's the soundbite for the history show, this History Moment show that we're talking about?
Oh wow, I don't know yet.
Do we take? Here's this is the idea, just a structure thing. Sometimes people will take out just a short clip or piece out out of a show, a full show,
Yeah.
take it out, and then make that into part of a promo or advertisement or commercial kind of thing.
Yeah, I could,
for
if somebody says something that's, I mean, let's face it, if somebody said something that's really interesting, provocative, I could see, that small clip as a tease, right, to get people to watch.
We have to think in that way.
Yeah, definitely.
But
Yeah.
all right, so this looks good. You're going to have some guests on here. You're going to have some direct. You do some teaching on here. So if I tuned in and I saw you just on the camera, are you giving me a lecture, or are you giving me some information about it?
I mean, we're definitely going to explain, and there will be plenty of teaching moments. Primarily want it to be a conversation, especially if there's somebody in here in the studio, because I think they'll feel more comfortable having, cause this is the way I like to do in class, have a dialogue, have a conversation. Not only that, have a dialogue with the people who are watching the show as well, so they'll feel comfortable watching
let me
it.
add this final thing. I know we're about to wrap up here in our show development show. But one of the things that some other folks have talked about is to have a blog that is a website for the show, so that people can not only watch the show, but then say, wait a minute, I wanted to ask the question, or
Feedback,
I wanted to make a point,
Yeah,
and
I
then
would
have
love
a way
that.
to kind of put that out on the web and have some interaction, have a kind of a show notes or the show blog.
I think so. People could not only ask questions about the program to get some additional information, or ask a follow-up question, questions they probably wanted to ask as they were watching, but also for some show suggestions, or if we've because I think it might be smart to plan ahead and say, in the next couple of months we're going to do a show about the Phoenix City story in the 1950s, and if there's anyone out there who has stories they would like to share, please contact us. I can imagine doing something like that too.
Wow, I know, and just imagine all of the archives that are out there. Maybe pictures that individuals have that have never been seen.
Oh yeah,
those kind of things. We see that pop up occasionally there.
Yeah.
But the idea of having a blog, having a way to interact, or show suggestions, I like that. I like that notion. So, all right, this has been fun. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been here with Gary Sprayberry, Dr. Gary Sprayberry, Chair of the History and Geography Department. Thank you. I was going to make sure we got those guys in there. This has been our show development for the History Moment. Look forward to seeing you again, and hey, look forward to the History Moment with Dr. Gary Sprayberry right here on Columbus State Television. Hey, we'll see you next time.